Iran, 1953. The CIA mounted its first major covert operation to overthrow a foreign government. The target was the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. He held power legitimately through his country's parliamentary process, and he was popular. Washington had once looked to him as the man to prevent a communist takeover. But that was before Mossadegh decided that the Iranian state, not British companies, ought to own and control the oil within Iran's own borders. When he nationalized the British-run oil fields, Washington saw red. The Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, and his brother Alan, director of the CIA, decided with Eisenhower's approval to overthrow Mossadegh and reinstate the Shah of Iran.
Crown Prince Abdullah greets the Shah as he lands at Baghdad airport after a 7-hour flight from Rome.
The King of Kings was back in control and more pliable than Mossadegh. American oil companies took over almost half of Iran's production. U.S. arms merchants moved in with $18 billion of weapon sales over the next 20 years. But the weapons and flattery heaped by America on the Shah blinded us to the growing opposition of his own people. They rose up in 1979 against him. Death to the Shah, they shouted. Death to the American Satan.
The Iran-Contra hearings, convened in May 1987 by a special joint committee of the United States Congress to investigate the sale of U.S. weapons to Iran and the illegal diversion of money to the Contras.
All our enemies knew it, and you wanted to conceal it from the United States Congress.
We wanted to be able to deny a covert operation.
In identifying those responsible behind the September 11 attacks, there were 3 viewpoints. First, that a very powerful and complex terrorist group able to successfully cross all layers of the American intelligence and security carried out the attack. This is the prevalent viewpoint, which has been supported mainly and advocated by American statesmen. Second, that some segments within the U.S. government orchestrated the attack to reverse the declining American economy and its grips on the Middle East in order to save the Zionist regime. The majority of the American people, as well as most nations and politicians around the world, agree with this view. Third, it was carried out by a terrorist group, but that the American government supported and took advantage of the situation. Apparently, this viewpoint has fewer proponents. The main evidence for this viewpoint links the incident with a few passports found in the huge volume of rubble and a video of an individual whose place of domicile was unknown, but it was announced that he had been involved in oil deals with some American officials. It was also covered up and said that due to the explosion and fire, no trace of suicide attackers was found.
I like to tell people when the final history is written on Iraq, it'll look like just a comma.
We have terminated a terrible, terrible deal that should have never, ever been made. And we will be putting on among the strongest sanctions that we've ever put on a country. And they're going into effect very shortly. They're mostly constituted and drawn already. And we'll just have to see what happens. I would advise Iran not to start their nuclear program. I would advise them very strongly. If they do, there will be very severe consequence, okay?
There is a great deception taking place as the masses in the West are being manipulated to going along with a war intended to overthrow the Iranian regime and to install a puppet leader, one whose strings can be pulled in any direction that the U.S. or their ally Israel desires. In what is now being described as the most direct confrontation between Israel and Iran in decades, Israel fired upon Syrian and Iranian forces late at night under the cover of darkness. Israel and Iran have been waging what the New York Times calls a shadow war in Syria for months, as Israel has continued to launch multiple airstrikes, often resulting in casualties for Syrian and Iranian soldiers. This attack came just days after Israel called up reserve troops to the Golan Heights, a disputed border region where the battle for oil routes is ongoing. I exposed this fact over 1 year ago in my video titled Breaking Syrian War and the Battle for Golan Heights, Genie Oil and Gas Exposed, where I warned what the agenda is, and it's now coming to fruition. This recent attack came less than 2 days after President Trump announced his decision to pull the U.S. out of the Iran deal. Trump said that the U.S. would swiftly reimpose economic sanctions on Iran that had been lifted following the 2015 agreement, despite the fact that the Iranian regime has not aggressed against anyone in over 100 years. In fact, the Iranians claim that the Israeli attack was a false flag attack, while Iran maintains that last night's skirmish between the Israeli Defense Force and Syrian army forces was a false flag and that the IDF struck first, continuing its pattern of airstrikes and other military assaults in Syria. The IDF boasted Thursday morning that Tehran will need a lot of time to recover from the most extensive Israeli attack in Syria since 1974. And though the Israeli Defense Forces say it's not seeking further escalation, the IDF says that the Syrian regime will be held accountable for everything happening in its territory and has warned against any retaliatory attack. They must understand that if it rains here, it will pour there, said Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman. The bottom line is, this is not looking good for the Middle East, as the CIA has been working to overthrow Syria and Iran for decades now, and with the help of their ally Israel, the war drums are now beating louder than ever. And those of us who can see right through their agenda must speak out and expose this plan now more than ever before it's too late. They lied about Iraq, they lied about Libya, they've lied about Afghanistan, Syria, and now Iran. So in the name of truth, please share this video, and let's help the masses in the West come to the realization that the United States, along with their ally Israel, are the #1 aggressors here who need to be stopped. If you appreciate our efforts to counter this propaganda, please check the links in the description below to find out how you can support our work here at Press for Truth, as we will continue to document this proxy war as it unfolds. So thanks for watching, my friends. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and as always, keep fighting the good fight. This is Dan Dix reporting for Press for Truth.